So tell us briefly, what is the difference between sex and sexuality education?
So when we talk about sex education, like I said before, it's focused on the biological or the physical. So it's really focused on two bodies and what happens during sex and how to keep safe from STIs and unwanted pregnancy. But when we move into relationships and sexuality education, it's a lot more than that. And we move away from focusing on two bodies to having two people or more than two people, and how those people interact in a healthy way. The reason why it's so important, especially from a New Zealand perspective, is we've got quite high rates of things like domestic violence and dating violence, which is domestic violence but happening between younger people. So our young people are really needing to be able to be with education that's going to teach them how to have a healthy relationship. So not focused on that sex side of things, but how to interact well with each other, how to talk about things, how to communicate effectively. And that's a big difference. So if I say in the conversation RSE, because sometimes I'll shorten it, that stands for Relationships and Sexuality Education. So keep everyone in the loop.
And how do kids react to talk about sexuality? Is it still giggles, or is there more openness and maturity there?
I think it's probably a bit of both, actually. So through my master's, I did interviews and sort of focus groups and things with young people. And there was obviously giggles and from some of the younger people, but then also, I guess, a need as well. And like a real invested interest around discussing and speaking about topics that I think they haven't always been able or been open to speaking about. So I think for a lot of young people, it was actually like a really engaged and actually wanting to speak about those things because they haven't always been given the opportunity in school or at home and things like that. So it's a bit of both, but it's definitely a topic that is becoming more and more spoken about openly here, I think.
Jessica, why we need relationships and sexuality education? It is not enough to just teach safe sex anymore?
No, like I said before, in New Zealand, we've got quite a big issue around domestic violence, having quite high statistics in domestic violence, and especially dating violence and sexual violence occurring between younger people. So when they start dating and they start entering into relationships and they're not too sure what's healthy and what's not, and then they're getting in situations where they don't necessarily have the knowledge and the skills to keep themselves and their partner or whoever they're with safe. So I think it's really important to be teaching around the relationship side of things and how we interact as human beings and move away. Obviously, we still do teach around the safe sex because that's always going to be important, but it's really moving away from that a little bit and looking at the bigger picture. So as I said before, looking at it more holistically and moving away from just that real physical or biological lens that we've had on this area of education for a long time. And adding to what Kate said before, young people, I feel like we don't give them enough credit for how much they actually want to know about this. They do want to learn this stuff. And I think traditionally we've tried to protect young people. We don't want to tell them too much in case they go off and start relationships really young or things like that. But like I said before, it's not always looking at romantic relationships. Young people can learn how to have really healthy friendships or really good relationships with family members. So it's not always in that sexual space. And I think that's where our thinking needs to change a bit.
Kate, I wanted to ask you because I think we still have got the concept, no matter which culture we are talking about, we have a concept of we need to teach our girls how to protect themselves. We still do not teach boys how to behave well. Is that the case in New Zealand as well, or have you seen a different approach?
I think it's probably where this whole project really started from. A lot of young people aren't, boys, girls, everyone are not in New Zealand aren't necessarily getting sexuality education, getting relationship education. And so we don't necessarily know what people are getting. But I mean, as Jess has mentioned a few times, the statistics here don't always paint a good picture. And I think it's men, it's women, it's everybody in between not being able to necessarily have that education. And that's sort of, the reason that the app came around.
Jessica, what would you say to a mother of a teenager or even early age? What is the perfect age to talk about sexuality?
Good question. So we're targeting the app for around 13 years old up to 24. So that's when we say young people, that's kind of the age range. But really, the research is showing that these conversations need to happen in primary school. I'm not sure if you call it primary, but we're talking around starting age 5 and up. Because like I said before, it's not just, I think people get a little bit confused, or there's a little bit of fear in there that we're going to teach young people, young children about sex and things like that. And that's not the case. When we're talking about relationships and sexuality education, it's about having good friendships. It's about creating that foundation. It's not about teaching around sex and sex educations for young children. It's teaching around how to interact in a safe way and in a healthy way with each other, be that a friend, be that a teacher at school, a parent, a sibling. It's just those like life skills that I think it's really been underestimated how important they are. And it's kind of been left up to sort of this process of trial and error, that as you grow up and you meet different people and you learn these things, but that's not necessarily the case. And I think if we had this kind of information and were able to build these skills, simple communication skills from a young age, I think we'd be much better off. So definitely from a young age, but it would have to be appropriate to the age.